If you have a hard time with boundaries, how might your life be different if you could say no as easily as a joyful yes? I'm Love Coach Mariya, and for over a decade now, I've been encouraging folks to empower their compassion so it's big enough for ourselves as well as others, and so our boundaries can become healthier than ever. You're listening to Empower Your Compassion, and on this show, we'll be unlocking transformative insights to help you reconnect to your true yes, so you can say no from that more expansive energy and get more of what you want in your relationships and your life without sacrificing your compassion. Are you ready for more love? Let's grow. Hello, thank you for tuning in today. To go even further into aspects of communicating about our boundaries, I've invited my friend Sara Ness to join us. She is the Chief Catalyst at Authentic Revolution and Research Director at Seek Healing. She has guided over 10,000 participants worldwide into deeper connection with themselves and others, including leaders at Google, Dell, Mindvalley, and the National Weather Services. She is a veritable nerd about group dynamics, conflict, and facilitation. In this episode today, we'll dive into the E of the Gates method, which is expressing your no without disconnecting. And we're going to talk about a few ways to do that, and even touching a little bit on how to navigate pushback on your boundaries in some really loving and creative ways. So let's get into it. Thank you so much for being here, Sara. I'm really delighted to talk about this with you today.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Thanks.
Looking forward to it.
I was just mentioning that the Authentic Relating community was the first group of people that I really encountered truly healthy boundaries with, in my estimation. And what I noticed was that they could say no without being overly apologetic or overly abrasive. And part of that was that there was no disconnection. Like, they would maintain friendly eye contact and stick around, and it was just like clean. And as kind of the founder, I think it's safe to say, of the local Austin Authentic Relating community anyway, I am just delighted to be able to talk more about that with you.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Great. So one thing that I kind of, came across as a tool for saying no without disconnecting was tying into my background as a dog trainer. One of the things that we would talk about would be following a no with a yes. But in that context, it was like, if you say like, no, don't do that, then the moment they stop doing that, then you give them some positive affirmation. Say, yes, great, that not doing that thing, that's good. So the following a no with a yes. But then I realized, especially as a recovering people pleaser, being able to do that with boundaries felt like a really comfortable sort of stepping stone. So, I can say, no, I'm not available for that, but I am available for this. And I can sort of offer an alternative that helps maintain that connection. And I still recommend that tool frequently. But do you have any, what are your favorite go-tos for communicating boundaries without disconnecting?
We've been working a lot on conflict lately, so I've been thinking about this, like especially in the heat of the moment, how do you set boundaries? And like two things come to mind. One is yes and versus no but, which feels like what you're talking about. Like that you can kind of, if an idea is not quite what you want, you can go, yeah, I like this bit. And a way that I do that is I'll usually try to find like, what is one piece of it that I can say yes to? So if someone is like, hey, can you work on this project with me? I can be like, I would love to work on something with you. And like, I like this piece of it. Could we do that? Right? Or I'll be like, no, I can't do that, like you said, but I would love to do X with you. And the other one is saying yes to the person, but no to the idea. So like you're talking about, one of the things that makes boundaries really difficult is if someone says it while backing away, which we do because we're uncomfortable setting boundaries. or saying no. So somebody like ask me something that you might want me to do.
Do you want to go swimming later?
I can't go swimming later.
Mm-hmm.
See, it's like I've looked away, I've backed up a little. You almost always see the looking away.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you instead like kind of stay in connection, you can usually find something to say yes. You can be like, oh my God, you could say, I would love to do something with you,
Mm-hmm.
and get closer. And swimming is not my favorite thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for asking. Right. And see, there, I didn't even offer an alternative.
Yeah.
Which is oftentimes what people get into is like, they're like, I don't actually want to do the thing. I don't actually want to hang out with the person. But if I say no, I have to offer an alternative.
Mm.
If you just go with the like, thank you for asking, like, or if people hit on me, for instance,
Mm.
it's like, instead of saying, oh, I'm not, or worse, like shaming them for it, being like going on the internet afterwards and being like, can you believe what this person did? Second to say, wow, I know that for me to ask someone out takes a lot of courage. So I feel really flattered. Um, Thank you. I'm actually not interested right now. But I noticed like feeling like warm and complimented.
That's so sweet.
Feels really different.
Yeah. Um, I do also advocate for that yes can just be acknowledging the connection. Or sometimes it's also like when people are dysregulated and they come to you for rescue,
Mm-hmm.
um, being able to say something like, I can't save you from this, but I can hold your hand through it.
Mm-hmm.
It
Yeah.
is also something, a way to kind of uphold a boundary in a mutually supportive way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the essence of a lot of it, right? Like I won't fix this for you. I won't do exactly the thing that you want or that you say, but I will like acknowledge your humanity and like be respectful in my no and honor that you have a right to ask. I think one of the things that I find so difficult about a lot of our culture today is this sense of like, if you do something wrong in communication, it is your fault and you're irredeemable. Like, how dare you ask me? How dare you hit on me? How dare whatever it is. And really, it comes from a discomfort in setting our own boundaries. We're like, well, I don't know how to do this skill, so obviously it must be the other person's fault for making me uncomfortable.
Yep. I actually call that preemptive resentment due
Nice. I like that.
due to misplaced responsibility. So
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that there's this behavior that people do, subconsciously, but um, someone will ask for something and the receiver of the request will get so flustered. And I've done it too. And I think what it is like we get annoyed that we're being put in a position to have to hurt your feelings by saying no. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like this weird preemptive resentment. And then that's where they're like, how could
Yeah.
you even ask me that? Like now I have to be mean.
Yeah, exactly. And it's extra complicated because like if you look at people that are on the autism spectrum, for instance, or don't read social cues as well, like one of the hallmarks that I find, and I have a lot of friends like that because I freaking love that they're just open most of the time. Like they don't read social cues, so they'll say things openly and ask about them. I'm like, yes, thank you. I don't have to guess. But I think a lot of them get ostracized because they will request things or they say things directly, and the other person will feel like I shouldn't have to say no, or like they'll ask multiple times if the response isn't clear, because oftentimes our no is not actually clear. We just assume the other person has gotten the point if we say something vague, and then we resent them. Um, I used to, I mean, in college and afterwards, I used to have a thing happen where I would just stop being attracted to a partner that I was with, like really good guys, and I would be so frustrated at myself because
Hmm.
I wouldn't figure out why I'd suddenly lost attraction. And I would have to break off the relationship. It happened with 3 or 4 people.
Hmm.
And eventually I it happened with somebody and they made it very safe for me to explore it. Because it would happen especially with sexuality. And so it happened with a new partner, and I messaged and I was like, hey, I'm so sorry. I just feel like I can't, like something in me has turned off around this. I don't know how to do the sexuality. And he was like, it's okay. Like we can still partner. Like you don't have to, sexuality doesn't have to be a part of the relationship. And it was just like, all of this space opened up all of a sudden to have my own experience. So I was able to explore for the first time, well, what is that moment of shutdown? And it was that I had a boundary and I hadn't spoken it. And I had
Mm.
no idea that I had a boundary. Like something would have happened with that person. I was uncomfortable. I sent a very vague signal that I was uncomfortable. They didn't pick up on it, and my body just shut down. It was its protective
Mm.
mechanism. So when I started realizing that, it was this huge aha of like, oh my God, I need to figure out how to set a boundary there because it's not up to them to pick up on the fact. And it was really insightful for me.
Did that insight help you to shift things and sort of, I don't know, prevent
Oh,
that from reoccurring?
yeah, because once I knew what was happening, I was like, well, obviously, I don't want to just become unattracted to all of these people. So I have to figure this out.
Yeah.
So it gave me space to notice the shutdown as a cue that I had missed something, look back and figure out what that thing was. And mark you, like in the beginning, I was really bad at communicating around it. I was like quite messy and um I would do it in a way of like backing away. And I would, come back afterwards and be like, that thing made me really uncomfortable and I don't want that to happen again. Instead of being like, hi, like I noticed that there was this moment.
I think that's kind of a natural learning curve with boundaries. Like when we start to learn what they are, what ours are, how to communicate about them, there's always that sort of awkwardness. And I think that part of what helps us get through that is having some safe people who can handle your bumbling. And so when you go through enough clumsy, communications about boundaries that aren't as disruptive as you're afraid they will be, then you kind of start to gain a little bit of confidence to be like, oh,
yeah.
I was worried it was going to be really bad. And so I kind of came into it with like this weirdness and it wasn't bad. So then like it helps you soften.
It's the practice of doing it that really makes it easier. Also, I have a view on boundaries that are like most of the time what you need is not a boundary. Like most of the time what you need is not to cut off the other person in this action. It's to be
Mm.
able to like have a conversation. Like, hi, there was a moment and a thing that you did had an effect on me and I didn't like that effect and I'm wondering if we can explore like even in firing people now, something I've really noticed is it works way better if I go into it as a conversation of just saying, hey, I noticed that like this piece of your work has not been what I hoped. And here's the feedback we've gotten from people. Here was what I was looking for. Like, did we have the same expectations? Is there anything that got in the way for you? If we've had the conversation a couple times before, sometimes go and being like, hey, do you know why we're having this conversation? And they'll usually know. And like very, very rarely I have to go to a point of saying, you're fired or like we actually have to end this relationship. Most of the time in collaboration, we can figure out that it's not the right thing for them or there's a different way forward or like boundaries. Sometimes I feel like boundaries can be shutting a door. And for me, they're only really necessary after I've knocked on that door a bunch of times or I've like held it open and the other person hasn't respected it. But until I've done that 2 or 3 times, I don't want to like sever part of the relationship. And sometimes it is necessary. Like if someone keeps, you know, denying requests or isn't able to change a behavior that's really important to you, then setting a boundary feels really important. But again, I guess one other piece that we talk about is that boundaries are like about what you will do, not what the other person will do. I imagine you have a good mnemonic for this or something.
Yes, I do actually.
What is
The short version is drawing boundaries around behaviors instead of people. I feel like cutting people out is really kind of the last resort. I also like to talk about boundaries as distinct from needs. Needs are important and boundaries are important, but they're different things and we communicate about them differently.
Mhm.
And when we communicate about boundaries, I think it's helpful to perceive our boundaries as our resource limits and that it's our responsibility to manage them. So I feel like the oxygen mask rule is really applicable to thinking of boundaries.
Mhm.
And so when we communicate our boundaries, it's more of just like a gift of information. Like, hey, when this happens, this is how I feel. And so this is what I need to do to take care of myself.
Right.
And so it's more about what you do, like that follow through for self-care. And the way that we communicate it can explain what behaviors are acceptable or not acceptable, or like how they impact you and what you're going to do about them. Um, I think it's also relevant. You mentioned the door. I think of healthy boundaries as selective gates. Most people have flimsy fences or spiked walls. We
Nice.
often tend to go back and forth, right? You have flimsy fences for too long, and then you throw your spiked walls, or some people, the default is spiked walls. And all of that stems from a belief that boundaries are mean and we don't want to be mean. And so there's all this weirdness that we do around it, or we fulfill the prophecy and make them mean, right? Because that's the only option. It's either we have to be too nice or we have to be mean, because that's what boundaries are. But selective gates basically have you giving people the keys to accessing you through the gates that you've installed. And one boundary that comes up sometimes is a boundary around how many times you have to communicate about a boundary. You know what I mean? Like if I've said that yelling is not good for my nervous system and I have to keep removing myself from the conversations because they keep escalate to yelling, I might say I'm not really going to have conversations with you anymore because they keep
Fair
getting
enough.
to
Yeah.
this point, right? And I say that because I think that it is good to have some tolerance for repeating a boundary a few times, like, explaining it, giving room, a little bit of grace for a learning curve of the other person. Oh yeah, that's right, I forgot. I do want to, work on this behavior around you or whatever. But you don't want to excuse it forever. Like at some point, it's time to draw like another boundary around how many times you've had the same
Yeah.
conversation.
It feels like, yeah, I get what you're saying. It feels like actions versus patterns. Like you draw boundaries around actions. You're like, okay, you yelled at me, and when you yell at me, I like tense up, and it's hard for me to stay in the conversation. So would you be willing to not try not yelling at me in the conversation anymore? I'll talk in a moment.
However, I
Like,
would say that even the request shouldn't necessarily be about modifying their behavior. It's more like when you yell, I tense up. And so what I need to do is leave the conversation.
yeah,
And so I'm not even asking you to do anything different. But if we keep ending up in the situation where I have to leave because we're yelling, I'm probably just not going to have as many conversations with you.
yeah, yeah, thank you. That's better said. Yeah, so it's like the first time maybe it's like if you yell, I'm gonna ask you to lower your voice. And then after that, if it happens a couple times, it's like, hey, this is a pattern. If you yell, I'm gonna leave the room. So I like that idea of like escalating boundaries. It's something I've encountered a lot with my husband is this thing where one of us will say, I want this behavior to change, right? In the form of like, I'm gonna have this reaction if you keep doing this behavior. Whether it's a request, can you not do that, or a boundary of um like him bringing something to me that he's worked on and me instantly giving advice or pointing out what could be better about it. And this is especially hard because we work together. So it's like, aha, this thing needs to be fixed. Wait. That's going to trigger him, right? So it's like his boundary could be, well, I'm not going to bring you my work anymore, or I'm not going to bring it to you if you start out by giving me advice on it. But then like he loses out by not being able to bring me things. And so we do it oftentimes in the form of like, how do we workshop this? Like, because I found it very, very hard. Like it was over a year of me working on it before I started having any shift in that. It was just like so instant that he'd bring me something. I'd be like, have you seen that S is out of place? I mean, this is beautiful, honey. um so we had to workshop it. We were like, okay, like what is the moment where I'm first doing that, and what would he have to do to like, can he remind me, like bring it to me with the context of, here's a thing, could you tell me something you appreciate about it first, like, or could we have a situation where like he just gets as angry as he feels and I feel the emotional reaction, and then that cues me to change my behavior. So I kind of like the question of, why is it that this boundary isn't sticking, or why isn't this request sticking, and can we figure out like different experiments we can run and ways to massage it so we don't lose out on the value of whatever's happening, because sometimes a boundary can cut off that value.
Absolutely. And for that, I kind of like to lean on NBC in just kind of a loose sense. I love the concept of how we confuse strategies for needs.
Mm.
And when you are able to separate those, two people can get so much more creatively collaborative around how to get the needs met when you can identify the strategies and plug and play different strategies for, getting to those underlying core needs.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds like a similar process, essentially, just like, what are the pieces at play here and how can we rearrange them and get everyone's needs met?
Yeah, and how much stamina do we have for this thing to keep happening?
Yeah.
Is there a point where it has to be cut off, or can we keep working on it? And obviously, like, it's different in different relationships, right? Like, he and I have a really good communicative relationship where we generally trust we have each other's best interests at heart. But I think about, like, if you're navigating with an abusive partner or a parent or whatever, that sometimes, like what you said, of I'm going to leave the room if you keep shouting, because if they're not willing to negotiate and work on changing anything, it's
Then you
hard.
end up in that sort of progressive boundary situation. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's a good segue actually to my next question for you. Because this is something I'm actually still kind of exploring myself, and it ties really nicely in with your conflict work lately. So I wanted to bring this, to this like this larger conversation that I'm having in this podcast. But so there's this idea again, like the T of the Gates method is trusting in the other person's ability to manage. And part of that is just like a check-in and being like, it's okay. Like if they have, feelings about my boundary, like I don't have to take full responsibility for that. If they, are needing help with something, they might have other resources, just
Mm-hmm.
having a moment of trust in that. And then the next step is that expressing your no, ideally without disconnecting. But then like, what are some ways to navigate what I'll call like boundary pushback? So even I feel like it's a lot less likely when you are communicating your boundaries in some of the ways that we were talking about earlier with, without pulling back, without being harsh or abrasive or even apologetic. Like when you're in that sort of like grounded, centered, connected energy, you're less likely to get pushback, I find. But, yeah, we
Yeah.
often will still have those maybe toxic dynamics with family, et cetera. And I think that I find that when we do get some pushback on our boundary, we're more likely to either like cave on the boundary and like give in to what they're demanding, or get into like a fight about it. So I'm just kind of curious what some of your tools are.
Um, I'm really curious about the like multiple requests thing, because there is a way, and I haven't seen enough research on this, about like what happens after we get multiple requests, because it becomes progressively harder to say no. Like even I don't know if you know the Milgram experiment with the electric shocks, where people were it's kind of a classic one, but like people were asked to give electric shocks to someone that they thought was a fellow subject. Like they would ask questions. If the other person got it wrong, they would get shocked. Couldn't see the other person behind a screen. It was not actually someone else there, but they started hearing them like scream as they like increased the volume of the shocks and such. And an interesting thing about the experiment, so almost nobody stopped. Like something like, I don't know, 80% of people kept going beyond when they thought the other person had actually died. Like it's used as one of the classic experiments of like, wow, people will do just about anything if they're told to. Um, but one of the interesting hallmarks of that experiment was the protocol was that the person had to ask the researcher 3 times if they wanted to stop. So almost everybody at some point during it turned to the white clad figure next to them and said, I don't know if I'm okay with this. Like, this doesn't feel. And the experimenter would tell them, you have to keep going. And then they'd be again like, I just really like, can I check on the person? Like, they don't seem okay. You have to keep going. Right. So there's, and that like almost everybody asked once or twice, but very, very few people were willing to ask 3 times. There's something about hearing a no again and again where like I think I tend to judge myself of like, if it's a boundary, of course I would keep asking. Well, our brains don't actually work like that. We will literally think we have killed someone before we set a boundary. And that's not a personal failing. That's like something about how we function. And I don't know as much about the like psychology of it as I would like to, but I think I wanted to push on that point because it's been so valuable for me to go, oh, I'm not, you know, weak in this way. I'm just human.
Oh, in terms of like caving.
Yeah, that like I think I tend to be very judgmental of like if somebody does push back, my instant response is like, oh, well, I guess I just wasn't understood, or like, I guess I can make it work, especially if they push back more than once. But that there's actually it's extremely rare for anybody to be able to like react to that. Like we have to actually train ourselves. Another thing I was thinking of is like the difference between clarification and pushing on the boundary. Sometimes I think when somebody pushes on our boundary, what they're actually just doing is trying to figure out like what the boundary is. Like if you go, hey, would you like to go on a date this Sunday? And I say, no, I don't want to go on a date this Sunday. Well, what I might say in response is like, are you free Wednesday instead? And to some people, that would be like, you're pushing on my boundary. I said I don't want to go on a date, but it's not actually clear what the boundary is, right? So that's one thing, versus the boundary of like, oh, I don't want to honor this boundary, so I'm going to ignore it or push back on it. And then I think my tool for that situation is just to like get progressively firmer. And this is something I think I've learned more from working with a lot of people who have some form of autism, is just like your boundaries won't always be understood or taken. And sometimes it's like not a sign of ill will, usually, I usually take it as like you probably haven't understood that this is a no and it's actually an important no. And the more they push, just like the clearer my no will get. So at first it's like, I really appreciate you asking. I'm actually not interested right now. And then I get a message again. I'll be like, I actually don't want you to contact me. I'm not open to this type of communication. And then if I get a message again, I'll be like, okay, I have set my boundary. I'm going to block you. I wish you well. Right. So it's like, oftentimes this happens over messages that I'll get from people. So
I
it's
actually
like,
just had a really similar experience to that on a dating app. The guy, I just, without getting into the details, there were just little orange flags, I guess, that were like cropping up, and I was like, I don't remember what I said, but something like, I'm not gonna pursue this. And they were like, oh, cool. Well, can I, get a little bit of feedback? And I'm like, you don't really do anything wrong. It just doesn't feel aligned. And then he like went to a weird shaming place, and I was just like, hey, I'm just responding to be respectful. So you can see it before I like unmatch. And I was like, I'm gonna leave this here until tomorrow, and then I really do wish you the best. And I was just, bro.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a boundary there, right? There's like the boundary is, hey, I am not open to holding this. I hear that you're having a reaction, and I have I don't see it as my responsibility to be with. And that's hard. It's like I feel like pain in my heart more for like, oh my gosh, is it going to get a bad response? Or I think it's like, is that going to play into the person's story of like how people are, which is what I just like, I want to make people's psychological lives better by being around and teach them better communication skills and such. And it's always hard when setting a boundary has somebody feel like this is what always happens to me. And then you're like one of the always.
Yeah.
And you're like, hi, I'm a human. And also like, I don't know how to now not be part of the problem that exists in your head.
Yeah. It's been a challenge, but I've kind of had to extricate myself from that responsibility. I think I've tried to fix people too many times and realized that that's not, it's not only not my job, like in a weird, I don't know, entitled sort of way, but it's more like there's a there's a proper like role and context and structure where, I don't know, we can say education is possible. And if that container isn't, set up and mutually agreed upon, like I'm not going to be able to change the lens that they view the world through. And and I think that kind of on a side note, when I fall into that sort of rescuer pattern, I just end up unintentionally like enabling their delusion of disempowerment for their own ability to create change and outcomes in their life. And I'll qualify that by saying that we can be helpers when they ask for help.
Yeah.
But usually when I try and insert my help, it's coming from a belief in me that they don't have the power to do it on their own. So I have to come in and like save them from themselves. And that just like enables that sort of victim mindset that the world is happening to them. Other people need to be the ones to save them, etc. And it doesn't usually in the long run have the intended result of them seeing people differently. But if I can encourage some sort of container where there's more of that mutual understanding, then it tends to be a little bit more functional. But
no, I love that. It feels inspiring. I'm like taking notes of on boundaries. What it has me think about is like sometimes I conflate somebody's like short-term effect for long-term effect. Like, oh, if somebody is feeling hurt in the moment, then any actions I take that extend that hurt are going to be ultimately negative. Like, so if I've set a boundary and they're in a shame spiral, if I then clarify my boundary, they're going to be hurt and it's going to play into their story of what happens when they hit on somebody, for instance, or whatever, which I don't want people to feel like they can't express their attraction. Like that's an important thing, right? But something I'm taking away is like, well, maybe there's a long-term effect of them understanding then what a healthy boundary has looked like and looking back on it and going, wow, that was actually set with care. Like, can I take that as an example that I can miss the forest for the trees sometimes. So.
And I'm with you too. Like I definitely do want to do my reasonable best to contribute to I don't know, a positive experience of life on earth with other humans for people. And that's why I didn't just ghost him. I didn't just block him. I did give him, I tried to give him a positive interaction, and I don't know, I guess he didn't really rise to the occasion, but hopefully that will plant a seed for maybe some future understanding.
Yeah. It's kind of where do you expend your energy? I mean, oftentimes there are messages I get that like I don't respond, or I won't respond until I get 2 or 3, and then I do set a boundary around it, or I'll like be nice on the first one, and then after that I'll be like, I did this yesterday where somebody that was messaging me about a community conflict, and I was like, I'm sorry, I'm not involved in this community and leading anymore, so like can't speak to this. I would do best. I'm sure I will get at least 1 or 2 more messages, but now it's like, okay, I've set my boundary. I don't have to respond.
I think one of the reasons it's really hard is just a very natural thing. We're social creatures and we're wired for an amount of external approval and acceptance so that we don't get rejected by the tribe, left alone to die in the cold. And I think that that's a big influence for like that study you were talking about where people like are gonna just follow orders from the person in front of them, even to the detriment of a fellow human. Because it's something, it's like a survival thing that we're wired for. And I think having compassion for that gives us more access to kind of working around it instead of against it.
I mean, I'm going to give a horrible example, but everyone, it's like the Nazis, basically. Like the Nazis were just normal human beings. And it's not like all of us are wired to try to be comfortable and safe in the places that we're in. I mean, look at ICE right now. Like, we're not speaking up against a lot of the things that are happening that I think on some level we know are wrong. There's this amazing story of I'm going to get the words entirely wrong, so I almost don't want to tell the story, but I think it was Khrushchev that's giving a talk after like Stalinist Russia. If I've completely butchered all of my history, please excuse me. But and he's like, somebody in the crowd shouts like, why didn't you stand up to Stalin? Like, why didn't you stand up to all of these atrocities? You're complicit too. And he just shouts at the crowd, who said that? Everyone's totally silent, looking around. And he's like, that's why. So we think that we're going to be better at setting boundaries, respecting boundaries, like speaking up for our own needs, doing the right thing than we actually are. which is why I think the work you do is so valuable, because like it's a practice. It's a practice, and it has to be constantly practiced, and it has to be experimented on, and like it has to be done differently with each person in some ways too. Like there's a way that I set boundaries with my mom that's really different than how I set boundaries with my husband, than how I set boundaries with my brother, whatever. It's like different languages, different intensities. You learn people's habits and how they need to be communicated with, and you also learn like what intensity of boundaries you need. My boundaries with my mom are like, there's a lot more I let her get away with than my husband in some ways, because she's I don't see her as often, and she's older, and she's not gonna like um she's just not gonna respond to boundaries in the same way, even though my mom is a phenomenal communicator. um
You have a different relationship.
yeah. I don't want to say it. I realized I was saying it almost as like most people would hear, oh, moms are like not good communicators or don't get the point. It's more just like the way that she takes things in, and my husband and other people take things in are different, and what their
Mhm.
triggers are going to be are different.
And I'll add too that even with intention and practice, it's it's how do I say this? It's still very imperfect.
Mm-hmm.
And we're always going to have our humanity and our flaws, and our our survival mode is going to kick in different situations. And I think the best we can do with the practice is just like kind of mitigate that. Some folks say that like we're always going to harm each other to some degree, especially in close relationships. Like it's kind of unavoidable. We've all got wounds that are going to get poked.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more, I think, about learning how to sort of accept that, learning how to navigate it, learning how to develop repair skills, learning better communication. It's never going to be perfect, but I think developing some kind of resilience is really helpful. And for yourself and also interrelationally too.
It feels like it comes back to what you were talking about at the very beginning, like this idea of committing to connection, that like
Mm,
committing to connection with others, but also committing to connection with yourself.
mhm.
A good friend of mine, Jordan Allen, used to say that when we're uh, yin to other people, accepting, we're often yang to ourselves, which is like harsh or boundaried. And when we're boundaried to other people, we're oftentimes being soft to ourselves. And there's a balance between those two, where I've had friends, especially male friends, experience a ton of pain from making a mistake or saying something wrong that they didn't even realize at the time, and then having somebody go off on them over text and then block them and not give any chance of response, which I think is being soft to yourself but very harsh to others. But then I've also had the experience of staying in communication with someone for way too long because they were experiencing pain at me pulling away. And
Yeah, it's so tricky to have that balance. And I mean, I feel like the flimsy fences and spiked walls kind of illustrates that as well. Being maybe too soft for others and harsh on ourselves, or being too harsh for others because we're soft on ourselves. And um, my whole like slogan mantra is empowered compassion, because I think you could also describe that as being like overly compassionate to the detriment of yourself, or like overly empowered with no compassion for others. And so when you empower your compassion, then it's big enough for yourself as well as others. And then you're also challenged though with that dance and like making sure that you're taking care of yourself as well as others. Um and I think I will venture to say that we need to kind of prioritize ourselves again, kind of like the oxygen mask rule, so that we have enough to care for others.
so I want to ask you one, because this is a question that comes up often with our conflict students, which is like, what do you do when you have someone that's not really willing to respect boundaries, but you have to stay in connection with them for one reason or another? Like, say, the parent of a child, or I've had it happen with like a boss that like kind of keeps disrespecting you in your communication, especially happens when there's some sort of power dynamic. How do you navigate those situations, or how do you help people do it?
That was actually part of my question for you too. I don't know that I have an answer yet. And I think I feel like the co-parent is one of the best examples, because with a boss, I'm like, it's not, ideal, but it's much easier, relatively speaking, to find a different job than to get away from a co-parent.
Yeah.
And, for that, I think it's just a matter of, first of all, and this is a challenge that I think a lot of people don't acknowledge, but having clarity on your own boundaries for starts. I think part of the reason that our boundaries end up getting trampled is when we don't even know what they are. Um, and and then it's a matter of compromise and tying back into nonviolent communication. And I just talked about this in the last episode I published, but sussing out the difference between strategies and needs and figuring out how you can get creative with strategies to get ideally everyone's needs met, like everyone involved in whatever the situation is. I don't think people should ever compromise their needs, but I think that if you get creative on strategies, you don't have to. But I mean, one example, I guess, I had a job that was meant to be a shorter term temporary solution, and it took longer for me to create an alternative, like a better foundation to step out of, to leave that job into something more aligned for me. And it was hard. I spent years in that job really not wanting to be there, but also acknowledging that like I had financial needs that needed to be covered. And so finding ways, sometimes it's honestly just like accepting that there is an amount of discomfort that we're going to experience in life, and learning how to check in with your body, regulate your nervous system, find healthy things to do. As long as the situation that is uncomfortable isn't like actively detrimental or dangerous, abusive. I think trying to work on a long-term solution to find the best compromise possible, or even get out of it completely. But again, with that co-parent, there's usually not an escape, but you can probably find a minimal amount of interaction. So I don't know. There's a really long-winded, maybe non-answer.
No, it's interesting because I don't have a good, clear answer to it either, right? Like, there's not a lot of situations I've been in where there was like this person is genuinely like, I can't communicate well with them, and also I'm stuck in this situation. I had a housing situation like that where somebody flew off the handle, and then we were living, I was kind of dependent on them for owning the property and my house being on the property. And I think in that case, I actually didn't do a good job of boundaries, especially early on. I saw things starting to go downhill, and I was scared to speak up because I was like, well, this is not my house. I don't have the power to say no to this. But at the same time, if I had like brought it up and discussed it, especially around like people living in the common house, I kind of have a co-housing-ish community. And it wasn't until other people backed me up that I was like, oh, I have a right to my opinion. Which I think can be double-sided, right? Like you can have other people like affirm you too much in your boundaries, but then I think there's the opposite side of I needed someone else to tell me, hey, this is not okay. So I don't know, I'm curious about it. Like I have some like I make a distinction sometimes in conflict, especially between like the light arts and the dark arts. The light arts being like, let me express my feelings and let me like be curious about yours and let me kind of do relatively good communication in the actions, and the dark arts being like what you use when all else has failed, which can be things like power mapping, like where in this system do I have resources and status and authority that are unused that I can draw upon to pressure the other person, which if you're really dealing with someone, like especially in negotiation, sometimes is what you got to do. But I'm constantly looking for things that are shy of that.
Right. Last resort.
Because that's oftentimes useful in systems where like systems are not personable. Like I think that's the big difficulty with capitalism is like we treat companies as humans, but companies don't have empathy because they don't, you know, they don't feel, they're not in connection with others. So we've created all sorts of barriers between us and feeling other people's emotions. So systemically, sometimes that it's, I feel like dealing with systems is a good experience of dealing with sociopaths. Um, so
Nice
doing things,
analogy.
yeah, doing things like power mapping can be useful there.
Yeah. I, in addition to the job situation, which felt very much like a repeat of a relationship that I was in, that I tried everything in my power to make it work. And once I had exhausted all of that and felt confident that there was nothing more that could be done, I did start taking the steps to extricate. And I like to say that I single-handedly consciously uncoupled us, and I spent about a year doing it because I wanted to maintain, like to preserve the friendship. And it was nice that at the end I was really able to say like, hey, I'm not available to continue participating in this perpetually dysfunctional dynamic, but I am open to a more loving arrangement as friends. So I was able to kind of draw that boundary without deploying spiked walls. But it had to be very conscious and patient and dedicated to what was best for both of us. Despite it was like the hardest part was knowing that it was going to hurt him in the process, but realizing that we were hurting each other and ourselves by staying together was really what helped motivate me to kind of do the right thing, as they would say. But like I said, what was best for both of us. But again, it's not a co-parent situation. Or I also have a friend, I guess it is also kind of a co-parent situation, but her added challenge is that there's like a financial situation where they're living together and can't really afford to live apart, especially with both of them having a large enough place for the kid. Um, their their relationship isn't horrible, but it's not ideal. I think they kind of both would like out of it, but they're, so it's just this like
It's it's a lot. And I
lot.
think the time element of it too is really big, where it's like, how long do you give it? How much do you negotiate? But then it's like, I look at something like my parents, who were horribly dysfunctional for my entire childhood and were only staying together because of us and had like really awful dynamics. And then after we moved out, my mom, and I took my mom to Burning Man, she was basically like, all right, I'm gonna divorce your dad. Uh, Told him she wanted to get divorced. He completely changed his behavior, and they had 10 years of the happiest I've ever seen him. So sometimes you kind of don't know. But a lot of it was because she hadn't set boundaries. She had only resented him or told him what he was doing wrong. So I think that was one of the big changes, was her being like, hey, you know, if you do this, I am going to leave, instead of don't do that.
Yeah. And you also bring up a good point with the time factor. I mean, even a co-parenting situation, eventually the child will grow up and be an adult, and you don't really have to, I mean, you might have to see the other parent at like special events or special occasions and whatnot, but um, yeah, I mean, a 10-year sentence of misery doesn't sound fun, but life does go on. Um, I did want to circle back though to that sort of navigating boundary pushback. Um, I feel like there's still a scenario that I haven't quite touched on, and I'm trying to articulate it. You know, when you assert a boundary, maybe with a parent, and you say, like, I don't know, I guess I drew a boundary with my dad at one point that I wasn't open to conversations about politics anymore. And that might be a little too benign for this case, but like, if he were to push back in a way that was like shaming me or trying to manipulate, like how do you navigate those kinds of things?
One thing, I'm just going to make a brief plug that every Wednesday we do fight labs, where we
Yes.
have people bring scenarios like this to role play and workshop. So this is exactly the sort of thing where we, you know, anyone who's watching is welcome to come. They're free. They're Wednesday afternoons. Um,
It's
and,
online.
it's online.
Online.
Yeah. So authrev.org/fight lab.
Cool.
Or if you just look up Authentic Revolution Fight Lab. Uh, so I've gotten to like work through some of these situations of like being somebody's dad and saying this thing and like them having to workshop or vice versa. Because you will play different parts. Um, so what I might do, let's see, if I was like, can we not talk about politics anymore? You be your dad for a second. I'll see what I do. Hey dad, I would really like to not talk about politics anymore. I noticed that like I just don't enjoy coming home as much when we do that. So
You
if we
don't
could have,
care? You don't care about these things? These things are so important. This, like, I'm taking this as a personal affront. You don't care
hmm,
about me if you don't care about the world and what's happening and the way that it's being destroyed.
wow. Yeah. Um, I get that it's like a big thing, right? Like it feels like if I don't want to talk about it, it feels like I don't care about the world. I imagine you're like, I don't want to have raised a daughter that doesn't care about the world, right? Like that would suck.
Yeah.
It's not that I don't care, it's actually that I care about my relationship with you more, even if that sounds selfish. And I noticed that like I walk away with lots of arguments in my head whenever we have these conversations. And it feels like this time with you is precious. I just want to be able to spend it hearing about your life, what you've been doing the last couple weeks. Maybe we can like set one battle royale night while I'm here, each visit, and we like save up our politics arguments for that. Would you be open to that?
Maybe, but it feels like politics are so important to me. It feels like if they're not something we can talk about, then we can't connect.
It's like cutting a part out of our relationship or of who you are.
Yeah.
What about it is important to you? Maybe I can.
Well, honestly, I think it's important to stay aware of these things so that, like, I want you to stay aware so that you're safe.
Okay.
It's how I love
Uh,
you.
yeah, I appreciate that. Um, yeah, I mean, I struggle with that too. I go in and out of reading the news on a weekly basis almost because I read it. I get overwhelmed with all the pain in the world. I have to stop reading it. I sometimes wonder if I'm doing enough. So it's like I want to know, and I notice it's like it's just hard for me to exist day to day when I know all of it. So, um,
I guess I forgot that you could know things without me telling you.
yeah, man, I get this awesome weekly digest. I can give you a subscription if you want. It's like politics and global news and but I don't always read it because it's just yeah. I know sometimes like, imagine you think I'm like overly sensitive for having feelings about things, but um
Hmm.
I
Well,
don't
I'm
know.
glad to
Like
know that you're staying informed. That does help.
yeah, yeah, and feel free to like send me articles if there's anything that you read that you think is particularly good. Maybe if you're okay with it, I'll do the same.
Hmm. And scene. In my scenario, though, the problem was that he was sending me too much shit all the time. I'm like, I can't. I need you to
Uh,
stop. But
yeah,
anyway, that was a wonderful
spam filters.
yeah, right.
My
I
dad
mean
would do that too. Yeah, I realized in the middle of it, there's actually something that they used to come up with my grandparents. So I was like, oh,
mm,
this is real for me.
thank you for doing that. Before we wrap things up, I'll include some links in the show notes, but what are some best ways for people to find what you're up to?
Authorrev.org.
Okay.
So AUTHREV, it's short for Authentic Revolution. And then there's a ton of resources on there. There's some like free manuals of relating games to connect with other people. There's free conflict resources. There's an entire course that we just created on how to have difficult conversations. So that would probably be a good one, including lots on boundaries, but also and power, but also on like tactical tools for navigating how to structure difficult conversations, how to resolve them, all the different kind of permutations, and fight labs also. It's kind of like there's conflict, there's facilitation, and there's connection on there for whatever folks are interested in.
Awesome. I just want to say thank you for not only being here and having this conversation with me, but for all the work you've done in the world and for creating all of these resources. I know that you have put like at least a decade of most of your time and energy into these things. And it's a wonderful gift to the rest of us. So really, thank you.
Thanks. It was lovely to talk, and
It
I'm glad
was,
we got to reconnect. Glad you're doing
yeah, thank you. And thank you, dear listener, for tuning in. I highly recommend following up on Sara's offer for the wealth of resources that she has created and provided, all available on the website authrev.org. I've linked to that in the show notes. Again, it's autrev.org, and that's short for Authentic Revolution. In fact, she and her team have just released an on-demand conflict course that you can find there, authrev.org/ADC. She and her team are really passionate about developing frameworks for creating deep connection with anyone from strangers to family without weirding them out or crossing their boundaries or our own in the process. In addition to the tools that she has provided, as well as the Fight Lab that she mentioned, if you would like any assistance on your journey developing healthy boundaries, navigating life and interpersonal dynamics, I am happy to be available for that. Head over to explorelovingboundaries.com and you can grab a spot on my calendar. No charge, no strings, just loving space and helpful tools. Learning all of this information is definitely helpful, but it won't create changes in your life if you don't integrate it and incorporate it. And that's what coaches are especially good for. I certainly have used my own and continue to do so. It's a wonderful resource that I think, of course, I'm biased, everyone should avail themselves of. Wherever you're at on your journey, though, I send you love and courage. Namaste.